All right, it's the most asked question I get, and now I'm going to finally answer it for you guys. I've been answering it piecemeal, one little sentence at a time, to each individual that's been asking me, and finally I thought, Mike, you need to answer this question in video format once and for all for these people. So I want you guys to know exactly what I use for my rooting medium and for my potting medium. Mike, what kind of soil do you use? What do you use in your propagation beds? I'm going to show you right now. Now, I know I've answered that question a lot to individual people. I want to take you out there and show you exactly what I use and where I get it from and how I discovered this particular material. Let's get out there. All right, guys, so you've seen this before. This is just a little bed of bark that I've got, and I want to tell you exactly and show you exactly what I use. So I know a lot of you have seen this before. I've answered a lot of your questions about it, but what I use is just a fine fir bark. And now you're probably wondering, how did I arrive at that particular soil medium for what I use? And the number one thing is, it's readily available in our area. Now, when I first started propagating plants, this was one of the biggest questions I had as well. I didn't know what to use because I started out going to nurseries and to big box stores and buying all, their potting soil, and you get it in like 1 or 2 cubic feet bags, and it gets really expensive and racks up really quick if you're trying to start some kind of a small nursery, or you've just got a lot of plants for your own home use. That potting soil in the bags just adds up quick, and so I had to find a better way. And what I did was I went to my local landscape supply store that supplies gravel and bark and just different materials for landscaping, and they're located in every city. We've got, I think, 3 of them just within 10 minutes of me, and we live in a relatively small town, 35 minutes from the freeway. So I think wherever you look, you're going to be able to find one of these places. But the way to do this is definitely, if you've got any kind of a scale on what you're doing, you definitely don't want to be buying the bagged bark or the bagged potting soil, because you will go broke really quickly. It's expensive. If you go to one of these places that sells this stuff, you will actually be able to get, this is probably a half a yard, not even a half a yard. Actually, it's probably about a third of a yard. I've used up quite a bit. I used to have 6 yards of this sitting right here, but you will be able to get this much soil for probably 12 bucks, and you can pot up a ton of plants with that stuff. So the places around here generally supply this for 1 yard, which is a huge bucket on a tractor, 1 cubic yard for $25, and that's if you haul it yourself. If they haul it, they usually tack a few bucks on per yard, but you will be able to have them dump it at your place. Like, you've seen I have a dump truck, so I'm able to just bring it home myself, but you don't need one. Most of these places have a dump truck, and they'll be able to bring it out to your place. But if you have a truck yourself, you can just have them loaded up. If they bring it, they're going to tack a few bucks on per yard for their fuel and all of that. And then you have to set up a delivery time. But once you've got it at your place, you will have more potting soil than you know what to do with. Let's show you how I arrived at this particular soil. Now, this is fine fir bark, and in this area, a lot of the places sell a coarse bark, which is like a nugget bark, a big chunky bark. They sell a medium bark, and then they also sell fine bark. Now, there's usually 2 different types of fine bark that they sell, and one of them is just fine bark, and the other is a double grind fine, which sometimes can hold too much moisture. So the things I want you to understand are, there are 2 criteria that I look for when I'm looking at a soil medium, and one of them is that it drains well, that the water will not sit on it, it just drains right through. And then the other one is that it holds moisture. Now, I know those sound counterproductive, but they're not. So you want the bark to be able to soak up, or whatever you're using to soak up and hold a lot of moisture, but you want standing water to just flow right through it. You do not want water sitting in that pot and drowning your cuttings or your plants at all. So make sure that it meets those 2 criteria, that it drains well and that it holds moisture, and I'll show you exactly how I did this. Now, most places are very helpful when it comes to, they want to sell you bark, they want to sell you their materials, so they'll let you go and test it. And what I did was I went to one of these suppliers with a pot and a milk jug of water, and I went out, I said, hey, can I just go out to your piles of material and just play with it and see which drains really well and which holds moisture? And they let me go out there, and I went out to all their different piles, and I just scooped up all of this bark in a bucket, a pot with holes in it, just a nursery pot, and I poured the gallon of water in there and just watched what it did. And you guys can do the same thing at whatever supplier you have. Now, you don't necessarily need fir bark. That's just what's readily available in my area. You can use hardwood bark, you can use pine bark, you can use peat. I would mix peat with something else so it doesn't hold too much moisture. Something that helps drainage, like some sand or perlite or something, you know, something that's easily available in your area. But you can use whatever material is readily available. You can even use compost, and you've seen I have a pile over here of cow manure and composted cow manure, and I use that for potting up a lot of different things that I have here, odds and ends, and it is working out fantastic because it drains well, it holds moisture, and you don't have to worry about bacteria or microbes in there. We're surrounded by microbes. Microbes are in the ground, so I don't mind that. My potting soil is not sterile. It doesn't need to be sterile. Now, when I first started doing this, I was a little worried. At first I had a cement mixer, and I was mixing this fir bark with all kinds of other amendments like peat moss and vermiculite. You don't need to do any of that. You just need to find one material that works for you. You will spend more time trying to mix up the perfect potting soil, which doesn't need to be perfect, and you don't need to waste your time doing that. You just need to find a good material that's going to work for you right off the bat, that you can have delivered in a large quantity and then just use right as it is, because you're not going to have the time to be mixing up every individual little portion of this soil and making your own potting soil. You can if you want to, but it's not absolutely necessary. I've been doing this for 10 years, over 10 years, and I never worry anymore about mixing my own potting soil. So back to what you can use. Like I said, I've used manure from a local dairy. If you guys have access to a local dairy, you can use manure. I wouldn't use straight cow manure. This is a mixture of shavings and cow manure, and I would recommend some kind of a mixture there, because the straight manure can have too much salts in it and just fry your plants. But you know, whatever's locally available. So let's go take a look at what I did when I went to these places and tried to find the best potting soil available. So like I said, I got a pot, and I just took my truck down to the place, and I went out to their piles, and I just scooped up some bark from whatever pile they had into a pot like this. And let's head over to the hose and we'll just see what it looks like. Alright guys, so I've got my bark here. It's just the fine fir bark, and that's what I've used for the last, I think I've had that pile sitting there for since last spring I brought it in. But I put it all in a pot, and this is what I did just right at that place. I had a milk jug of water, but here we've got a hose, and I just sprayed it right in there to see what it would do. And when I do that in here, you can see it just drains right through. It doesn't hold water. And then when you get in there, you can see it draining right out the bottom of the pot. And I don't obviously water my plants that heavily in the hoop house. I just kind of run it over them. But you can see that it drains right through and does not hold water. But the bark maintains a moisture that is important for those roots to have. And as you know, right now it's wet, but over the next hour or so, hour or two, this bark will actually soak up all of that moisture, and the water will not be in between the bark. It will just be soaked into the bark and be giving those roots water throughout the next day or two, or however long you go in between watering. But that's all I did. Let's take a look at another material that I have right now on the property and show you what that looks like. Alright, so this stuff right here is more of a double grind fine bark, and they sold it as a fine, but I've been doing this long enough and seen a lot of bark that I know what I'm looking at. But I didn't necessarily want this, but they had been out of the other stuff that I normally would get at that time, and I needed something to go over my landscape bed with. So I bought this last year, and I'm not going to use it for potting up, but it'll be a good mulch around plants that are in the ground. So let's take a look at what this does with water and why I'm not going to use it for my potting soil. You can see that water. I don't know if you can see that well. That water just kind of wants to sit in that pot a little bit longer. Now it does drain through. It does drain through, but it is just sopping wet. Let's take a look at this real quick. See if I can. It is just, you can see it's draining through, but it's so fine that it is just, you can wring it out. It's sopping wet. You do not want this. Roots sitting in this material will absolutely just rot really, really easily, and you don't want material like that for your potting soil. This will work great for a mulch. Only trouble is it's so fine, weed seeds that blow into it will be able to germinate really easily. So a coarser bark would be better, but this is what they had at the time. Usually they have all the different types I'm looking for, but that's what they had, and I needed to get the project done last summer. But you don't want to use that for your potting soil, because as you can see, it just holds way too much moisture, and it's wet. I mean, it drains through, but it's wet, and you want air to be able to get down in there. The roots growing in that would rot, and your plant would die. And the next spring, when the sun started coming out more and the plant wanted to start putting on growth, it just started turning brown and dying, because the roots would be rotted, and you guys don't want that to happen. So make sure when you're choosing a potting soil, you go to the place you're looking at it, and you make sure it drains well, but it holds moisture, but it doesn't have standing water. It is sopping wet like this stuff is. So does that pretty well answer your guys' question? I sure hope so. So just remember, you can use a broad range of materials for rooting your plants, for potting up your plants. You don't need to specifically adhere to exactly what I'm using if it's not available in your area. Use what's available. Use what's easy to find and what's cheap to find, because ultimately these plants are going to be planted in the ground, not sit in pots for the rest of their lives. So I hope that helped you guys out. I hope you understand exactly what to do now from here moving forward to get good cheap potting soil, something that's readily available in your area. So if you guys like this video and it helped you out, please like the video. If you want to follow along and see more videos, hit the subscribe button, and until next time, have an awesome day.